In my family's storybook, I was the chapter they always wanted to rewrite. My career as a chef was a phase. My decision to rent an apartment instead of buying a house was irresponsible. But my greatest failure, the unforgivable sin, was falling in love with my husband, Marco. He's a carpenter, a man who builds beautiful things with his hands, but he didn't come with the right degree or the right zip code. So today, on the day of our daughter's christening, the storybook is being slammed shut. I'm standing in the church, looking at the empty pews where my parents and my brother were supposed to be. My mother's text from this morning is burned into my mind. We cannot, in good conscience, celebrate a life brought into a situation we don't approve of. We will not be there. They weren't just invalidating me anymore. They were invalidating my child. It was an act of cruelty so profound it left me breathless. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, a moment of pure, public abandonment. Then Marco's mother, Elena, came to my side. She saw the empty rows, she saw the pain on my face, and a look of fierce, protective love ignited in her eyes. She whispered something to her husband, who then slipped out the back. A few minutes later, he returned, and behind him, a flood of people, Marco's aunts, uncles, cousins, childhood friends. They filled the empty pews, smiling at me, nodding. Elena squeezed my hand and whispered, "A child needs a village. We are your village." They hadn't just come to a christening, they had come to a rescue. Of course. Elena's words, "We are your village," echoed in the silent spaces of my heart where my own family's approval was supposed to be. Their empty pews today weren't a surprise. They were a conclusion to a story they had been writing for years. The story of my wrongness. The first chapter was written the day I told them I wanted to be a chef. I was 18, and for the first time in my life, I was passionate about something. I had been accepted to the Culinary Institute of America. I expected pride. What I got was a deep, mournful sigh from my mother. "A cook, Clara?" she'd said, the word dripping with disappointment. "All that potential just to work in a hot kitchen? It's labor." My brother, who was studying finance, was a professional. I was choosing to be labor. They refused to contribute a single dollar to my tuition, calling it a waste of a good mind. The second, and most unforgivable, chapter was Marco. I brought him to a family dinner, my heart a nervous bird in my chest. He was then, as he is now, the kindest and most decent man I had ever known. They were brutally, politely unimpressed. My father asked him 3 times what a carpenter pulls in these days. My mother watched the way he held his fork. My brother asked him if he had a 5-year plan. They didn't ask about his heart. They audited his life. After he left, the verdict was swift. "He seems nice enough," my mother conceded. "But he's not your equal, Clara. He can't give you the life you deserve." My father called it settling. They saw my love not as a source of happiness, but as another bad entry on my life's ledger. They couldn't see the man I loved. They only saw a social and financial downgrade. It was everything. My apartment was too small. My friends were not ambitious enough. My restaurant was a cute little project. Each choice I made that brought me joy was another mark against me in their book of success. Then I met Marco's family. The first time I had dinner at their house, his mother Elena hugged me at the door. His father wanted to hear every detail about creating a new menu. They didn't see a cook. They saw a creator, an artist. They didn't see Marco's girlfriend. They saw a new daughter. They didn't judge my life. They celebrated it. They showed me what family was supposed to feel like. Not a courtroom, but a harbor. And standing here today, surrounded by them, I realize my parents didn't abandon me. They just finally let go of a daughter they never really knew. The organ music began to play, a sound that should have been joyful but was catching in my throat. Elena squeezed my hand, a firm, warm anchor in my sea of grief. "Deep breath, my daughter," she whispered. "Today is about love. Only love." And as I looked down the aisle, not at the empty pews, but at the rows of smiling, supportive faces of Marco's family, I understood. This wasn't a day of loss. It was a day of replacement. The ceremony was a blur of beautiful, healing moments. I saw the pride in Marco's father's eyes as he watched his son hold our baby. I felt the collective warmth of the entire church as the priest announced our daughter's name. But the real turning point, the moment the last of the poison from my mother's text was drained from my heart, came at the reception afterwards. Our small restaurant was packed, overflowing with laughter and life. No one was whispering about the family drama. They were too busy celebrating new life. Then Elena stood up, tapped a glass for a toast, and the room fell silent. She looked directly at me, her eyes shining. "I have heard it said that you can't choose your family," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I do not believe this is true. We choose our family every day. We choose them with our time, our loyalty, and our love. We choose who we show up for." The room was so quiet I could hear my own heart beating. "Clara," she said, raising her glass, "you are a wonderful chef, a brilliant businesswoman, and an incredible mother. But more than all of that, you are our family. Not by marriage, but by choice. Our choice and yours. You are our daughter, and this beautiful child is our granddaughter. We will never, ever let you feel abandoned. To Clara and to our beautiful new girl, Sophia. To the family we choose." A roar of "To Clara" filled the restaurant. As I stood there, with my husband's arm around me and my daughter in my arms, surrounded by this fierce, overwhelming, unconditional love, I felt the wound from my own family finally begin to close. They had tried to humiliate me with an act of profound cruelty, but it had been answered by an act of love so powerful it had simply swallowed the darkness whole. The power they had over me, the power to make me feel small and wrong, was gone. It had been replaced by the strength of a village that had chosen me. For the first time in my life, I was truly, deeply happy. The weeks after the christening were a blur of joy. My daughter Sophia's laughter filled our small apartment. Marco's family, my family, was a constant, warm presence, and my restaurant was thriving. The cold, empty space my parents and brother had left in my life was being filled so completely with love and purpose, I barely noticed it was gone. And of course, that's when they came back. The first move was a text message from my mother a week after the christening. It read, "I heard from your cousin that Marco's mother gave a very dramatic speech. It sounds like they really put on a show for everyone. There was no apology, no remorse, just a single passive-aggressive sentence designed to poison my new happiness, to imply that the love I had received was fake, a performance." I deleted it without responding. Her silence was followed by a phone call from my brother a few days later. "You're being incredibly selfish, Clara," he said, his voice laced with the old familiar judgment. "Mom is a wreck. You can't just cut us off. We're your real family. You're letting them turn you against us." He framed their abandonment as my fault. My self-preservation was an act of aggression. I told him I wasn't having this conversation and hung up. The final unforgivable betrayal came on a busy Friday night. My restaurant was packed. I was in the zone, calling out orders, the beautiful chaos of the kitchen all around me. And then I looked out into the dining room. There they were. My mother, my father, and my brother, sitting at one of my best tables as if they were regular customers. I walked out to them, my heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" "We just want to talk," my mother said, her eyes welling up in a performance for the entire room. But my father went straight to the heart of it. "We haven't met our granddaughter yet," he said, his voice low and demanding. "We are her grandparents. We have a right." And there it was, the breathtaking hypocrisy. They had refused to acknowledge her existence at her christening. They had abandoned her on one of the most sacred days of her life. And now, they stood here in the middle of my success, the one I had built despite them, and demanded the privileges of a family they had refused to be. They didn't want me. They wanted my daughter, a clean slate, a new person to control. I looked at their hard, entitled faces. They had learned nothing. They felt nothing. And I knew with a final, liberating certainty that they were owed nothing. The words hung in the air of my bustling restaurant. "We have a right." And in that moment, Something inside me didn't just break. It was forged into something new. I looked at their faces, and for the first time, I didn't see the parents whose approval I had craved. I didn't see the brother I had tried to love. I saw a virus. I saw a poison that I had spent my entire life trying to metabolize, and I knew, with the fierce, absolute clarity of a mother protecting her child, that I would not allow them to infect my daughter. The thought of them ever making Sophia feel the way they made me feel, small, wrong, invalidated, was so monstrous it eclipsed everything else. The years of my own pain became insignificant. This was no longer about me. It was about her. A profound calm settled over me. The clatter of plates and the hum of conversation in the restaurant faded into a dull roar. My world narrowed to the 3 people at this table. "You have no rights here," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was harder than any tone I had ever used. "You surrendered your rights as grandparents the moment you decided your petty disapproval was more important than her christening." I caught the eye of my host, Miguel. "Miguel," I said, my voice never wavering, "Marco and Sophia are in the back office. Please ensure that door remains closed and that no one disturbs them." He nodded, understanding immediately, and moved to stand discreetly by the office door. I had just protected my real family. Now I would deal with the intruders. I turned back to them. "This is my restaurant, and you are no longer welcome. You can get up and walk out of here quietly, or I can have you escorted out in front of all these people. The choice is yours, but either way, you are leaving, now." My mother's face crumpled, the theatrical tears beginning to form. "Clara, in public? How could you?" "You chose the venue," I said, cutting her off, "when you decided to ambush me at my place of business." My father stared, his jaw tight with rage, but he saw the look in my eyes. He saw the new, unbreakable thing that had taken root there. He knew I was not bluffing. Slowly, humiliated, he stood up. My mother and brother followed, their faces a mask of shock and fury. They walked out of my restaurant, out from under the warm lights, and into the night. And I stood there, not as a wounded daughter, but as a mother. A queen who had just defended her territory. The adrenaline from the confrontation at the restaurant didn't last. When Marco and I got home after the babysitter had left, a deep, hollow exhaustion set in. I held my sleeping daughter in my arms, the fierce protective anger I had felt earlier, softening into a familiar, lingering ache. I had won the battle, but the wounds of my old war felt fresh. I had stood my ground, but I was standing on an island, the bridges back to my past burned to the ground. Just then, there was a soft knock on the door. My heart seized for a second, but when Marco opened it, it was his parents, Elena and Roberto. Their faces were etched with concern. "Miguel from the restaurant called us," Elena said softly, her eyes finding mine. "We are not here to intrude. We are just here to show up." She walked over and sat beside me on the sofa. Roberto stood quietly by the door, a silent, steady guard. Elena didn't say she was sorry for what I had gone through. She said something far more powerful. "You were magnificent tonight, Clara," she said, her voice full of a pride my own mother had never shown me. "You were a mother protecting her child. There is no more noble thing in this world." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped box. "This is not about tonight," she said. "This is about all the tomorrows." I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a delicate gold locket. It was old and intricately carved. "This was my grandmother's," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "She gave it to my mother, and my mother gave it to me when Marco was born. It is for the daughters of our family, the women who carry the heart of the next generation. It is yours now." The tears I had held back all night finally came, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of release, of overwhelming gratitude. They hadn't just stood with me. They had formally, lovingly, irrevocably claimed me. They had taken the empty space my own family had created and filled it with a love so profound it left No room for shadows. My mother's act of cruelty was to say, "You are not my family." Elena's act of love was to say, "You are ours." And in that moment, I knew one was a lie, and one was the truest thing I had ever known. Today is my daughter Sophia's 3rd birthday. Our backyard is a chaotic symphony of laughter, shrieking children, and the warm buzz of conversation. My restaurant is closed for the day because my entire staff is here, part of the sprawling, loving village that has become our life. I watch as my husband Marco chases our daughter through the grass, while his father, Roberto, cheers them on. My mother-in-law, my mother in every way that counts, Elena, comes and stands beside me, linking her arm through mine. She's wearing the apron I designed for my restaurant. I am wearing the locket she gave me. I haven't spoken to my parents or my brother since that night. I hear about them occasionally, like echoes from a distant country, sad, secondhand stories of bitterness and blame. They are ghosts at a feast they chose to miss. They chose to be names in a story my daughter will one day have to be told, instead of the grandparents she could have run to in the garden today. Their absence is no longer a wound. It is simply a fact, as neutral as the color of the sky. For years, I thought family was a courtroom, a place where I was constantly on trial, my life choices presented as evidence against me. I fought for a verdict of worthy, a verdict that never came. But I was wrong. Family isn't a verdict, it's a table. A table you build with your own hands, and you choose who gets a seat. To anyone out there who feels invalidated by the people who are supposed to love you most, you have the power to build your own table. You get to decide who is worthy of your love and your time. Tell us in the comments about a person in your chosen family, your village. Let's celebrate the beautiful things we can build when we choose love. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe for more stories about finding your seat at the right table.